Wait, what did you say?
I don't know. You all know why. I didn't read the.
Yeah, just have one on your desk. Well,
It's already.
when I went to school in Wisconsin, obviously they had open carry policy, like it's like you can open carry anywhere. But like government buildings, school buildings, you can't. Like university was like no. So like every building, every arena, everything, there was always like huge signs up. No open carry. Sorry, you can conceal carry out there.
I thought we were too.
Yeah, like basically being like in any like everyone in here. Having kids in this nonsense. Why? Why do you need to go to the grocery store?
She was like, I need to give you an extra donation to give me some extra pages to get angry constantly. Oh I was gonna say I like type into this every time I try and find finishing. I think that also. And then should we have a conversation about credit for the ideas I've been mulling on that for a long time. But like obviously we don't want to step on toes. I think that was the shot. Sports, health, yeah, so if you guys want to file in.
Do you have an order?
Whatever order you want to be in.
It's kind of 10 quarters back there, so. You're going to be sitting right there.
Oh, you want us to go up now?
Yeah, I figure it's. I look at how tight quarters are. Like,
Yeah, I like to have to do that.
and to have to do that as a.
Yeah, totally. Oh, I don't have my jacket.
I don't think you need it.
Really? No, that's unprofessional.
You look very professional.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. Good? You want me to slide this? Okay. Good. I don't know why I have my phone with me, but well, it really silences the room, huh? Cool.
Hello, everyone. I hope you're having a great afternoon. Normally at a sporting event, we have to get you like a little livened up for this, but welcome. My name's Danette Layton, and I'm the CEO of the Women's Sports Foundation. We're excited to have you all with us, including those of you that are tuning in virtually on the live stream. Today marks a very special day for all of us, and as it's the 50th anniversary of Title IX, it's been a week full of amazing activities, and honestly, many of us just saw the portrait unveil of Patsy Mink, and it was probably one of the most emotional. I think all of us cried at some point throughout the entire ceremony, but it was remarkable to see the mother of Title IX and her recognition and being able to be hung here in the Capitol is really amazing. I want to take a moment to say thank you to the Democratic Women's Caucus and Representative Frankel for their support of this event, and a particular thank you to Gabrielle and Becca and all the staff of the caucus and Representative Frankel's office for your continued support of the Women's Sports Foundation. As you all know, Title IX focuses on prohibiting sex-based discrimination in education, but it extends well beyond our schools. girls' and women's access to sport has grown tremendously since the passage of this law 50 years ago. And while it's easy from afar to think about Title IX's impact in sports as limited to just the growth of opportunity, the truth is that Title IX has had far-reaching effects in all areas of sport and society. Whether it's with women using life lessons learned through sport to attain career success in business or the growth of collegiate opportunities, which help to build the pipeline for many of our women's professional leagues today, it is clear that Title IX has played a part. It is important that we take today's milestone to pause and reflect, appreciating the progress we've made, but using it as an opportunity to renew our focus because we know the work is not done. Yesterday, we had the privilege to join with the Department of Education in a Title IX 50th Anniversary Field Day event, and even had the honor of a visit from Vice President Harris. Seeing all the girls from our community partner organizations testing their skills in various sport stations was a great reminder about why we do this work and why we must continue to do this work. With that, I'm excited for today's conversation. We are so fortunate to have a number of members of the WSF family here with us, including our board chair and executive director of the Ivy League, Robin Harris, and WSF trustee, and former Notre Dame women's basketball coach, Muffet McGraw, also on our board. Thank you for both being here. I also want to give a big shout out to the WSF staff. I don't think a lot of people realize that we would not be here without them, from our great community impact team to our advocacy team. Thank you to everybody that's here to make this week special. It's now my pleasure to introduce to you our panelists. First, Megan Duggan is a 3-time Olympic medalist, International Ice Hockey Federation Women's World Champion, our current WSF president, and director of player development for the New Jersey Devils, just to name a little bit about what she does. Welcome, Megan. Next, we have Jessica Long, and every time I read this, I have the hardest time believing it. She's a 29-time Paralympic medalist in swimming, including 16 gold medals. 29-time, 16 gold medals, and is the second most decorated Paralympian in U.S. history. Thanks, Jessica. And then Alana Myers-Taylor is a 5-time Olympic medalist in bobsled, 8-time world championship medalist, and the most decorated black athlete in Winter Olympic history. But she also played softball in college, so she pretty much has played everything and is the true epitome of what Title IX is all about, and the ability to play and have the opportunity to play so many sports and earn your education. And then finally, one of our dear friends and partners for the National Women's Law Center, Nina Chaudhry, is General Counsel and Senior Advisor for Education at the National Women's Law Center. We'd like to welcome all of you and thank you. What a fantastic group this is going to be and a great conversation. And it's my pleasure to turn it over to my colleague, Vice President of Advocacy for the Women's Sports Foundation, Sarah Axelson.
Thank you, Danette. Thank you, Danette. And what a fantastic group we have today. I'm really looking forward to this conversation and really hope to have some time for Q&A at the end. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We're here to celebrate and acknowledge and reflect on the 50th anniversary of Title IX, and I'm going to share remarks that were shared this morning at the unveiling that Wendy Mink, Patsy Mink's daughter, said that we should use the anniversaries as a rededication, not a commemoration. And so really that is our hope and goal today, is to use the anniversary, this 50th anniversary milestone mark, to re-energize and rededicate to fulfilling the true promise of Title IX. And so we know that those 37 words have created tremendous opportunities in sports for girls and women. But I'm curious to hear from each of you personally what Title IX means to you.
Oh man, what a loaded question. Great question. First of all, thanks everyone for being here. This is great. I think, in order to continue to move this forward, I think the education piece around what Title IX is, where it came from, what we can do, having these discussions is so important. For me, what Title IX means to me is, how my career took off, being able to have a Division I scholarship to the University of Wisconsin, where then I was able to compete and play and grow, and then make the national team and go on and play in 3 Olympics. It means to me opportunity, right? And I was given that opportunity to compete collegiately after setting my sights on wanting to win a gold medal when I was 10 years old, and that played a crucial part in my journey. So being given that opportunity changed my life,
And that's why I want to continue to push Title IX forward, make sure that it's upheld, that institutions are in compliance. And that's obviously a reason why I love working with WSF.
No, I think if it's great, it's good.
Hello. For me, Title IX means. Yep. Okay. I'll just move it a little closer. I'm so sorry. Okay. To me, Title IX means absolutely everything. You know, for me being a young girl adopted from Russia, born without my lower legs due to a birth defect, you know, I didn't know what my life was going to be like moving forward. And it wasn't really until I found sports and the Paralympics that everything changed for me. And there was a time in my life when I never saw anyone that looked like me, a bilateral amputee, or especially in sports. And when I showed up to a swim team at the age of 10, my whole world changed, right? I knew that I wanted to be a swimmer. I wanted to win a gold medal. I wanted to be a professional. And I would not have had that opportunity if it wasn't for Title IX and all the women who came before me to pave the way. And I am so appreciative and grateful. And, you know, before sports, I would not show off my legs. You know, I didn't like when people stared. I didn't always want to be different. And sports gave me confidence. It gave me the confidence to move forward and to want to change, you know, break the norm for all the young girls coming ahead and the next generation. So I am super grateful, and I really don't know where my life would be like without it. So.
To me, Title IX just represents exactly everything Megan and Jessica mentioned, is opportunity. For me, growing up in Georgia, you know, obviously I always wanted to go to college and wanted to play whatever sport I could. But as a little girl, you know, you looked up to Michael Jordan or Ken Griffey Jr. and you're like, okay, I'm going to go play Major League Baseball because that's what you believed your options were. It wasn't until the 96 games, which I'm from Atlanta, happened to see that up close and personal, and you saw all these amazing women winning medal after medal for our country, that it really became real. It's like women have opportunities and women can be professional elite athletes. And then it carried on, and I was able to obtain a scholarship to George Washington University. And if anybody knows much about George Washington, it's not the cheapest school. So it's definitely something that would not have been afforded to me had I not had a scholarship. And oddly enough, the reason softball was a sport at GW, I was the first recruit and the first softball player at the university, was because they needed to add another women's sport to come under compliance with Title IX. So Title IX has continued to pave the way in my life and led my life in many ways, but it's given me so much opportunity. And as a woman at the age of 37, I'm still able to continue my athletic career, which I think is one of the lasting legacies of Title IX.
I will just say that without Title IX, I wouldn't be sitting here. I know none of us would be sitting here. I've been a Title IX lawyer for 25 years, so I am in awe of all the Olympians and amazing athletes, and Coach McGraw, who I'm a huge WNBA fan. But, you know, as Patsy Mink knew, Title IX was needed to open the doors broadly to education for women and girls, because before Title IX, there were quotas. Patsy Mink couldn't go to med school because of quotas. That's what led her to fight for Title IX. So I wouldn't have been able to go to law school. I played basketball in high school, wasn't very good, but loved it, and kept those lessons with me throughout my life. And now I get to watch professional women athletes with my 14-year-old son. So I think that's huge progress.
So Megan, you mentioned education. And I think one of the things that we know through the research is that so many people have not actually been taught about the law. Not only don't know and understand the nuance of it, right, that it covers more than just opportunity to play, that it covers the whole sports experience and all of education. But so I'm curious to hear from each of you when you first recall learning about Title IX, because I think it will give a window into how the education or lack thereof is.
Yeah. I mean, I think, to be honest, I don't think I knew the depths of Title IX until within the last 5 years, I would say. And I'm going to be 35 in September. So let's call it, I learned about Title IX when I was 30 years old. And now reflecting on all the experiences I was able to have collegiately and beyond, I think I've thought to myself, oh my gosh, I can't believe I had those because of Title IX. I think, you hear the words. I knew the term Title IX. I knew about the legislation when I was younger, but I didn't really, if someone asked me, what does it mean? Like, what does it stand for? Who does it protect? Where is it upheld? I wouldn't have known any of that. So I think the education piece is crucial. That's why yesterday's event to me, for those of you who don't know, we were at American University putting on, we did a panel and we spent some time running through basketball and soccer and STEM activities with local youth girls, middle school age, I would say. And but we also talked about Title IX and what it means for them, how it will affect them moving forward, how it's already affected them. And so that education piece, just having those conversations, I never had a conversation like that when I was in middle school. And so I think that's crucial, and that's why that event yesterday was so special.
I loved all of that. So I was just like taking that all in. I was just thinking about that too. I would say probably the first time I'd ever heard of Title IX was at one of the Women's Sports Foundation's annual salute. And I was young. I think one of my very first times I ever did anything with the Women's Sports Foundation was when I was 13, 14. I just turned 30. And I just remember thinking, oh, Title IX, so what's Title VIII? What's Title VII? Like, I just was like, oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
But the significance and the power and understanding all the women who paved a way to be here today, 50 years, the significance, just like you were saying, Megan, hasn't really hit me until the last couple years. And yesterday was so incredibly special to see the next generation. There comes a point, I'm still swimming, but there comes a point when you're not the young little girl anymore, and you realize that you have a voice and you can make change. And I am so excited for the next generation, especially, being a person missing legs, having a disability. I have a heart I love the Paralympics, but also anyone out there with a disability, right? There should never be discrimination against that, just being born different. And I couldn't control the way that I was born, and there should never, ever be discrimination. And I would love to continue to push for that moving forward.
So my dad was a professional football player, and granted, he was a football player before the collective bargaining agreement. So those of you who are familiar with sports law will know that drastically changed everything in terms of professional sports, and men were given much more opportunities. But as you can imagine, as a young girl seeing the Falcons training camp, I was like, whoa, this is amazing. All of this for athletes, it's crazy. And so years later, I would have the privilege of attending a basketball camp at University of Tennessee with legendary Pat Summitt, and I saw all the same types of facilities, but for female athletes. And to me, it looked even better than the Falcons training facilities. I was like, this is amazing. How do female athletes get all this? I've never seen anything like this. And it was explained to me it was because of Title IX and the opportunities afforded because of Title IX. And ever since that day, it's been like, wow, this is really such a privilege. And I'm sure those facilities back in the 90s, late 90s, are paltry compared to what goes on today in college facilities and whatnot. But I was just so amazed at the opportunities these young women have to pursue sports at that level, and it really hooked me, and it really started to teach me what kind of power Title IX actually afforded women like ourselves and actually could do in the future as well.
So I'm the same age as Title IX, I will reveal that, and I didn't know about it, frankly, till I went to law school. So my early 20s, I'm first generation born here. I played basketball, but really didn't know that I had Title IX to thank for even having an opportunity. So it's been really gratifying to be able to work on it for all these years, and I'm really excited and hopeful because so many more younger people now know about it, but we still have a lot of education to do.
A lot of work for sure. So Alana, I know, you obviously have had great success in the Olympics, and I feel like you were on every time I turned on the Winter Olympics this year. I feel like I saw you and had such, tremendous success with, now a 5-time medalist and most decorated Black athlete in a Winter Games. But we know that wasn't the start of your sports career, and you really started with softball. So I'm curious if you can talk a little bit more about your sport experience in softball, because even though Title IX is a total program law, right, and we look at everything provided to girls and everything provided to boys to look at equity, I also played softball, and I think because it's different facilities, oftentimes that's where we can see inequities, and so I'm curious what your experience was like playing softball.
Yeah, well, the very first experience I had was when I was really young, and I was playing in Georgia, not the most progressive state at times. So when I first started playing softball, there weren't a lot of girls that looked like me, and I was told on several occasions that black girls don't play softball. You play basketball. And for the longest point in my career, I kept being asked anywhere I'd go, oh, you're an athlete, you must play basketball. Oh, you're an athlete, you must play basketball. So as much as it's afforded opportunities to so many more female athletes, it hasn't necessarily increased opportunities for athletes that look like me. It has, but not at the same rate. And so for me, I didn't have a lot of role models who looked like me on the softball field growing up. And fortunately, that's changed and it's grown, but there's still a lot of work to do because, like I said, I've got told, oh, black athletes belong in the outfield, you'll never be a shortstop, which is what I was, you'll never be a pitcher. And now, if you watch the College World Series this past May and June, you saw black pitchers, you saw black infielders, outfielders all over the field. And so we still have a lot of disparity there. We still have a lot of work to do. But there is, it is a different experience for black and brown women within the sporting. You are still unwelcome in certain different types of sports. And that's the biggest thing is Title IX afforded all of us the opportunity to go out there and pursue our educational and athletic dreams. And I think there's still more that needs to come in order to make sure people that look like me, people that look like anyone and can pursue their athletic dreams in any sport.
Yeah. Nina, do you want to talk a little bit about, the Law Center research around black and brown girls and access or
Yeah.
lack thereof?
Yeah, we did a report a few years ago called Finishing Last, where we set out to really examine the opportunities that girls of color got in high school sports. And what we found was not surprising based on what we've heard, but still pretty sobering. We found that, girls of color finished last compared to white boys, white girls, and black boys. And we had to do this research in a roundabout way because we still don't have data at every school that's really available by race and sex. So it's not that easy to just go find out how many black girls are playing at a particular high school or how many Latinx girls are playing at a high school, right? Latinas or Asian American girls, any of that. So what we did was we looked at schools in our country that were 90% or more students of color or 90% or more white. And the first thing I want to point out is we found 42% of our nation's schools fall into one or the other of those categories. So we are still highly segregated, which is probably not a surprise to most of us. And then we examined opportunities for girls at those two categories of schools. And we found that the girls at predominantly student of color schools got the fewest opportunities. There were the biggest participation gaps between their enrollment and the opportunities on teams to play. And, to be fair, the pie at the predominantly student of color schools was smaller overall from all the athletes. And that's a big problem that we need to address, right? We need to make sure that resources are allocated equally to all our schools across states. Mm-hmm. But then even with the smaller pie, it was divvied up in a way that the girls of color got the short end of the stick. So there's a lot of work to be done to make that data accessible and make sure all our girls and boys are getting equal opportunities.
Yeah, certainly. I think the data is such a huge part of that, and we saw some good reporting out of the Shirley Povich Center about a month ago or so, looking at some of the CRDC data and how some of that falls short, and really being able to assess the opportunities that actually exist at the high school level. Megan and Jessica, I'm curious to hear a little bit more about your own sport experiences and maybe the equity or inequities that you may have experienced in your sports.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I am a Paralympic swimmer, and growing up before the Paralympics, I had said this earlier, but there was not anyone that really looked like me. Most of the local club meets, I was the only girl missing legs, and I didn't want to just always be the girl missing legs. And I'm really thankful that I wasn't treated differently, but it wasn't really until the Paralympics that things really started to shift, and that's where the confidence really grew. But I'll never forget being at some local swim meets, and there was a lot of people who didn't really want me to be there, right? Competing, getting up on the block. There were coaches who didn't always want to work with me, and that surprised me so much because, well, I was also really good. I could even beat the girls with legs. But that just surprised me that that was even a conversation. So I've seen that type of discrimination, and I have teammates who have one arm, and they would get disqualified for not touching with two hands, stuff like that. And they would have to fight these disqualifications, because in breaststroke or butterfly, you have to touch with two hands. So those were some things that were very common growing up, once even getting involved in the Paralympics, hearing their stories. But that was very real, and I'm out of the club kind of competition scene. I'm more into the Paralympic side, but that was a real big thing that I dealt with, and yeah, just heartbreaking. It's already hard enough to be different, but to feel completely discriminated against, that was very hard as a young girl.
Yeah, I think probably similar to most of the, athletes our age. Growing up, I played hockey, and growing up, I grew up north of Boston, and I played a variety of other sports too: baseball, soccer, hockey. I was always the only girl everywhere. For the longest time, especially in hockey, I never even knew other girls played. I was just like the girl that played. I was the only one ever with the boys. I never saw a girls' team, another girl on another team, and I didn't know any different. I thought that was fine. And kudos to my family and all the parents and players I played with, because I was just one of the athletes. I don't have any horror stories of being a young girl in a boys' locker room or anything like that. Like, I was very welcomed by all the teams I played on. But, as I got older and I look back on that, it's obviously because there were no opportunities for girls to play. There were no girls' teams. There was no, there weren't, maybe some of the parents weren't encouraging their young girls to play hockey. Mine were. But it wasn't a normal thing for girls to play hockey, right? And that kind of trends all the way up to just opportunities and access. And it wasn't until 1998, women's ice hockey was in the Olympics for the first time. And prior to that, similar to Alana, when she's talking about Michael Jordan and Ken Griffey Jr., who I loved too, by the way, I was a big Griffey fan. But I thought I was going to grow up and play on the Bruins. I grew up in Boston, and I used to say to everyone, I'm going to play in the Boston Bruins someday. And again, kudos to my family for just being like, yeah, you will, you will. And I do work in the NHL right now, which is kind of cool to see that come full circle. I don't play there, but in 1998, I saw women's ice hockey in the Olympics for the first time, and I was just absolutely blown away. I remember the games were in Nagano, Japan. I remember staying home from school because my parents wanted me to be able to watch and follow, and because of the time difference and everything. And I can picture watching the games and those women win. And someone from one of the women from one of the teams came back and spoke at an event I went to. Got an opportunity to meet her and see her in the flesh. Oh my gosh, another woman that plays hockey. And it just changed the whole trajectory of my life. And I think, I talked about it earlier, going to college, we had great opportunities as female athletes at the University of Wisconsin in terms of our relationship and, equities or inequities between our team and the men's team in men's sports. I never noticed any differences, to be honest. We had unbelievable facilities. We had huge budgets. We had, we traveled on charter planes, and this was 10 years ago. And that's all because of the evolution of it all, right? I grew up a young girl, not seeing women play hockey, and then here I was traveling on a private plane playing for a collegiate hockey team. And I know we still have a long way to go, but that was, it was amazing for me. And again, helped me kind of on my trajectory to make it to the national team. So, variety of different experiences, but obviously, Title IX to thank and to think about when I look at all those different experiences.
Well, and Megan, I want to stay with you for a second here, because you've covered a good chunk of the great things that you've done. One thing that you've left out is the whole fight for pay equity, equitable treatment, and all of the work that the national team did, and you were at the forefront of that. Mm-hmm. So curious for you to talk a little bit more on that, and also just how your sport experience really helped prepare you to take on that fight.
Yeah. I mean, how much time do we have to get into all of that? Just a quick, snapshot of that experience, and then I'll answer your second question, which I think is the most important. But I played for the national team at that point. This was back in 2017. Probably had played for about 10, 12 years at that point. I had captained one Olympic team, been through 2 Olympic cycles, and my mantra when I first made the team as a 19-year-old kid, that was my goal, was kind of just, keep your head down, keep your mouth shut, and work, right? Like, you got your foot in the door, stay on the team. And I did, and my, working hard never changed, but the kind of keep your mouth shut and keep your head down really evolved as I got older in my career and I started captaining the team and seeing, within our national governing body of USA Hockey, all the inequities between our team and the men's team. When it came to general support, the travel, the hotels, the amount of trainers, the access to food, all those different things, insurance, the compensation piece, the money that goes into, the programming, the marketing. It was night and day. I mean, even the clearest example I can give you, the men got $50 a day per diem, we got 15. So is it like, are women's daily expenses that much less then, right? And that's just like a very clear example, but if that was the case, you can imagine where it was and everything else. And so we started having conversations around meal tables and on, back of the bus at 4 a.m. when you're driving back from God knows where you were playing, and thinking about the men on their private planes. And so we started having these conversations and with the leadership group, and we thought, like, we got to do something about this, right? So we did a lot of research. We ended up hiring a law firm, Ballard Spahr out of Philadelphia, that actually, we got connected with them. They had represented the U.S. women's soccer team in a lot of their similar issues, and they helped us, present our case to USA Hockey behind closed doors and in a responsible and appropriate manner. It went on for about 15 months behind closed doors. We talked to them about all these areas, in these buckets that we wanted to make progress and see changes, and it continued to dismiss us kind of at the time, and so we got to the point where we boycotted a world championship. In about 2 weeks' time, we were hosting a world championship on home soil in the U.S. I had never played one in the U.S. in my whole career. We were inviting 8 countries to come play. We were the defending gold medalists, and we told them 2 weeks before, unless we make meaningful progress, like, we will not be getting on the plane and competing. Sadly, their first reaction was to bring in scabs and a replacement team, but I personally made probably about almost 2,000 phone calls in a week to what felt like every girl that played hockey in the United States, saying, please don't play if they call you, and this is why, and called their parents, and we called our under-22 team and our under-18 team, and everyone stood by us. And we were able to basically hold their feet to the fire and make the meaningful progress in all of the areas that we had laid out. And it was, it was the greatest experience in my whole career, outside of the gold medals. And we showed up. We had skipped training camp because we were in all these meetings and we had boycotted, and so we had to show up day one and play Canada the next night, which is our biggest rival. We ended up kind of, I think, hyped up on all the energy and excitement of the 2 years of all of that and succeeding. We went 5-0. We won the gold medal in overtime in front of a sold-out crowd in Michigan. It was really like the icing on the cake. I think we won, and we were like, oh, thank God. Because had we lost under all the noses of the decision makers we had just put through a public media storm, it probably wouldn't have looked good. But, it showed, the unity of our group, what we learned about. And I guess this is to your second question, that my whole life in sports, from when I was a young kid playing with the boys to wanting to go to the Olympics, to competing collegiately, to everything I had faced along the way, leading teams, heartbreaking, losing gold medals, all of that, sports, right, gave me the confidence, the leadership qualities, the ability to collaborate, to think outside the box, to see challenges as opportunities. Like, everything I know in my life, because my life's been built around sports, everything I know in my life came from sports. And I think that's why myself, these women, a large group in here is so passionate about our mission at the foundation of all girls, all women, all sports. Not because we want all these girls to grow up and play professionally and win gold medals. We want them to learn confidence, teamwork, positive body image, all these things that sports bring into our lives. And I think that answers the second part of your question. But I learned the leadership skills and the confidence to make major change in our national governing body through playing sports my whole life. And that's why it's so critical.
And so at the top, when you talked about, the idea of keeping your head down, and that was kind of the impression that you had throughout your career or in the early stages of your career, really to me brings to mind what sometimes happens when we do see Title IX violations, right? And I'm looking at Nina because the way it's structured, right, the onus is on the individual who's being discriminated against to recognize that it's discrimination, to know what to do about it, and have the capacity in both time and resources to advocate, to make change. And so I'm wondering if you have thoughts on that, or if there are policy changes that we can make to really, change that dynamic and that aspect of Title IX for the enforcement and protections.
Yeah, I mean, first I just want to say thank you to Megan and to all of these amazing athletes and women here and not here, because honestly, like, the courage that it takes to come forward and do that and use your platform is awesome, and so advances the ball. So thank you. And yeah, I've worked with many young women who have had the courage to come forward, whose names nobody will ever know, but who have come and said, like, I don't have a locker room or whatever, and have taken on their schools. But to Sarah's point, it shouldn't all be on, like, the young women and their parents. We have a Department of Education, right, a U.S. Department of Education, big news out of there today, with revised proposed Title IX regs, and they enforce the law. They're the primary agency, but they don't have enough in the way of resources, so we certainly need to fund them fully so they can do more proactive work. We also need a high school data transparency bill. We talked about data earlier. I know data doesn't always sound so sexy, but we need the data, right? And that was something that we worked on in partnership with for a decade here in Congress, and it didn't get passed, but the fight's not over. So I think for the staffers in the room in particular, if you want to hear more about that and how you can help, we are willing to chat about that. But yeah, I think we need more enforcement, and we need it at every level, right? Not just the feds, but states have Title IX obligations. I think a lot of times that gets lost. Every school has to have a Title IX coordinator, so making sure that everybody knows that, and then empowering
Making
students.
sure that they have that.
Right, making sure they have them. They're supposed to have them for the last 50 years, but they often don't. So, I think, and awareness and education, as we've talked about. I mean, it is true that even with all the enforcement, it is going to be the individuals often, and the coaches and the people who speak up, who are gonna make it happen.
And I think, too, in that regard, all of us had the beneficiary of having somebody in our lives who told us it was unacceptable to be treated inferiorly to men. And not everybody has that advantage. It starts very early when you have a brother and you're treated differently in your house, or you see a boy on the playground and you're treated differently from them. But fortunately, as I mentioned, we had those people in our lives and said, no, that's not okay. You have a right, and you can stand up for it. And we need more people. We need more people going out there and telling young girls is that it's unacceptable to be treated inferiorly just because of your gender. And that's one of the things sport does as well. I mean, in Megan's story, she mentioned is she was treated, to use a colloquialism, as one of the guys, and that's what we should all aspire to be in some sense, is be treated one of the guys. And so having that beneficiary, I'm sure it led into her ability and her willingness to speak up later in life. And it takes those people, having those people in our lives to understand is for every young woman is at some point she was told she's better than that and she can stand up for her rights.
Absolutely. I think for me, it was my dad early on. As part of our Little League, he was involved in the board of directors, and he happened to be in the office when they were bringing in trophies. And it was the girls' trophies and the boys' trophies. And so he looked at it, and he tells us the story when he gets home. He looked at them, and he was like, well, why are the girls getting smaller trophies than the boys? And the response he got from one of the other parents was, well, because they're girls. And and so for my dad, he was like, we pay the same registration fees, right? Like, how does that make any sense? And then right? Are we paying by inch? Like, what are we doing here? And so, but it was because he was in the room when they were coming in, and he was part of, he had the capacity to have the time to volunteer for Little League and be in that room and be able to just very frankly say that's unacceptable, right? And changes were made, and he was able to make changes just by asking questions and pointing things out that I think had continued because it was just the way it was always done, right? And so and by him coming home and telling us that story, I think it lit a fire and set an example in a way that we may not have had, my sister and I may not have had if he hadn't done that. So we know that, there has been great progress since the passage of Title IX. We've seen exponential growth for girls and women in sports, both in participation opportunities, but also in scholarships and the benefits and treatment, right? The facilities and the equity that we see in some of the areas is phenomenal, right? And we can sit and celebrate that, but because Title IX is a single access law, right, and really only looks at discrimination on the basis of sex and doesn't take into account the intersectional identities that some girls and women may have, we know through the research that girls of color, girls with disabilities, LGBTQ youth are often left behind by the law. Jessica, I'm curious for you to talk a little bit about, what your vision is for youth with disabilities, what room we still need, and what your experiences are within the space.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just sitting here thinking about all of that. I made my first Paralympic team when I was 12 in 2004. And I'll never forget coming home from that Paralympics as the youngest member of Team USA with 3 gold medals in my bag, and no one cared. No one knew what the Paralympic Games were. A lot of people thought I competed in the Special Olympics, which is amazing, but it's all very different and separate. And growing up, I always knew there was a difference between the Paralympic athletes and the Olympic athletes, and that was really known. And it isn't until more recently that there's been a lot more with the name change of the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee. I had lived out at the Olympic Training Center, that is now the Olympic and Paralympic Training Center. And I think in 2019, I'm a little bad with dates, that's when we had the medal money. Operation Gold, it was finally equal pay for the medals, where I think we were getting like not even half, like a quarter of the payment.
It was like I think gold medals for Olympians, you get the bonus is like 30,000.
30 something.
Where the Paralympian
We were
gold
like
medal was like 1,500 or
yeah, it was wild. So there is still so much. I feel like, not only we've come so far with Title IX, and yes, let's celebrate, but let's keep figuring out ways to not ever have discrimination, especially in the Paralympic world. And I would say there is not complete equal pay with the Paralympic athletes and the Olympic athletes, especially with our monthly stipend. And it doesn't allow us to be able to train. There was another swimmer on the Olympic team that got, I think, $3,500 a month to train and to live, and we get $1,300 a month, and that's very difficult to train at an elite level. I've also seen a lot of discrimination with Paralympic athletes trying to compete in the collegiate world. A lot of coaches, again, don't want to, especially in the swimming world, want to coach. We have a visually impaired athlete that wanted to swim D1, and they didn't want her to come, and she had a fight. A lot of amputees will want to compete, and that's another whole fight. So I would just love it for one day for people to really just be all about the Paralympic movement and to understand it. And I am very proud to be a Paralympic athlete, and I'm so proud of my fellow Olympians who are so on board and so supportive. These girls are so supportive of all that I do, but it's not the case always at the USOPC with the Paralympic athletes, and we need to keep pushing for that change for the paras.
And do you have, at the youth level, what type of experience, do you see? And obviously, I think having you as a visible role model is just so powerful. And even, the commercial that ran during the Olympics and Paralympics this year, everybody was talking about it, right? And people who may not have known your name before knew it after that commercial and that visibility. But curious for you to reflect on, what you see at the youth level for kids with disabilities as well.
Yeah, for sure. Things take time. That commercial took 20 years in the making. 20 years where people didn't know my name really or anything that I was doing in the Paralympic world. And, being a part of it as a young girl, I would just I think a lot of it really boils down to coaches willing to work with the youth, because that truly is our future of the Paralympics. And you see in other countries, they are so willing to work and adapt the practices to different abilities. And in the Paralympic world, it's really unique because we have so many different classifications and abilities in the water. So I am able to swim alongside Olympic athletes. But there are some para athletes in lower classifications who are incredible. They just can't keep up with us, right? They need their own lane. Or visually impaired athletes who might need a tapper to let them know when to turn when the wall's there. And there's a lot of coaches who are not willing to take the time and work and adapt with these athletes. And I mean, you see a huge difference, right? We talk about sports and confidence and what it teaches you. And to already feel so different and to navigate this world with a challenge is already hard enough. And to be a woman in sports, so I would definitely say I think it really does start with the coaches. And I've sat on some coaches meetings with the Maryland. Oh, this was over 10 years ago. I'm trying to remember what it was, but it was the Maryland we were talking about swimming, USA Swimming, Maryland USA Swimming, and they had brought up the conversation of me, and I was not really paying attention. I think again I was 14, and I was just kind of writing in my notebook. But later I found out that they had asked why I was even getting recognition for being a girl with no legs. And I wish I had paid attention a little bit more and been like, hold up, I belong here too, right? People with disabilities belong, and we need more people to be willing to work and adapt with athletes, for sure.
Absolutely. Nina, from a policy perspective, looking at, intersectional identities and marginalized populations that are often left behind by the law, do you have thoughts or suggestions of things that we should be looking at or doing perhaps differently or more of?
Well, I mean, I second everything that's been said. And again, just I think having data, I hate to be a broken record, but broken down by all the categories, right? So right now we have some gender data, but we don't have gender by race and disability, all those things. I also forgot to mention earlier that there is another piece of legislation that we would urge people to support, which is the Gender Equity and Education Act, and that goes back to sort of providing school Title IX coordinators with the resources and training they need, because when schools do have Title IX coordinators, we typically talk to them, and they are trying to do everything, right? And they don't have the resources, and they don't have a team. So yeah, I think we need to really raise awareness. I mean, these stories are so powerful, and I think people don't know. Like, I didn't know so much of the discrimination, in the pay and the stipends and the things that are you're facing. So I think the more we can do to raise awareness of that, and then really try to make sure that our policies reflect equity at all those levels. I mean, there are laws, of course, that protect on all these bases, and so we need to enforce them and educate people about their rights.
Yeah, and in the Olympic and Paralympic space, just for existing legislation, equal pay for Team USA is another piece to look into and consider. So, okay, I want to leave some time for questions, but for closing thoughts, when you think about the future, next 50 years of Title IX, what do you envision?
I think, yeah, no, I know, it's hard. I mean, there's still so many, we just talked about it. We still see so many inequities in so many areas. And I think it's the, upholding the law. I think it's challenging the norm. I think it's changing the conversations around dinner tables. It's a whole slew of things. It's finding allies. It's, everyone leaving this room and telling 1, 2, 3 people what they learned today, that they, maybe didn't know about Title IX. I bet there's, think about how many people when we leave these doors, have no idea what Title IX is, right? And we've spent all day, all year, all the last 10 years, planning this day, and it's such an important one. It's such a special one. I'm excited to keep banging on tables, keep talking about Title IX and beyond, and I hope that we're just having a huge party, because in 50 years everything's upheld to the fullest extent, and that's, I think we would all probably want that for a lot of different areas where inequities exist, but.
That was good. I would just obviously echo all of that, but just that we keep showing up. We keep showing up when things get tough. We know exactly what to do when things get tough, right? We train every day when practices get hard to keep moving forward, to keep pushing through. So my goal or my vision is young girls keep learning that valuable lesson that sport taught me, to keep showing up, to keep asking questions, to not apologize, to keep moving forward no matter what.
For me, hopefully moving forward in the future, what I would like to see is an increase in women's participation on the sports administration and coaching levels. I think it's one of the areas that Title IX still has a lot of work to address. And obviously, if we're able to increase sporting opportunities for young women, it's going to have that much greater pool of women who then go on to be coaches, who then go on to be administrators and that sort of thing. But the biggest impact we can have is if we have women at those tables, if we have women in those rooms that are able to make those decisions, that are able to be a part of the discussions. And then they'll make sure that women have opportunities at the youth level, at the high school level, at the collegiate level, but women need to be in those rooms. And as I mentioned, Title IX right now is not doing a great job of ensuring that women are receiving coaching positions, that women are given interviews at those sports administration levels. And fortunately, we have some high-powered hitters in the room that are able to have some of those positions, but we still have a long way to go. And I think it starts with having a voice and having a seat at the table.
Yeah, I'll just say that I hope everybody knows what Title IX is in 50 years. It's like common parlance, and that really, little girls feel empowered and little boys see them as equal, and that everybody is seeing the amazing women athletes and girl athletes and not thinking twice about oh, they're women or girls. They're just kick-ass athletes, So that's what I hope.
Excellent. Well, thank you all so much for the great discussion. I think, we've made great progress, but we're not done yet. We still have so much work ahead of us. But really happy to take the opportunity today to refocus and recommit to fulfilling the promise of Title IX, and happy to open it up for questions.
Can I ask a little bit about if anyone would be willing to talk about the recent issues with female transgender athletes and how Title IX might cover that or anything else?
You're probably the best at this, honestly.
So, I think it's our view that all girls and women should have access to sports and have access to the lifelong benefits that they provide. And while at the elite level, there's, room for reasonable regulations, at the youth level, we should really be talking about inclusion and having access for all girls to be able to play sports with their friends. Right? That is what we just heard about, all of the lifelong benefits, all of the fabulous things that sports can do for a child. And at the youth level, we want all kids to have access to that and to be able to participate with their friends.
Yeah, I'll just add that, the Supreme Court has stated that sex discrimination includes discrimination on the basis of gender identity and sexual orientation. Title IX talks about sex discrimination. It's very clear that the law prohibits discrimination against trans individuals. So I think legally that's clear, and everything Sarah said, absolutely. It's all about, being able to be who you are and have fun and play with your friends and hang out. So we want kids to be able to do that.
And from an elite athlete perspective, I think where it gets complicated is the IOC, obviously, as the international federation, and some of you may have seen the recent FINA legislation or the FINA ruling, is they're not governed by Title IX because they're international governing bodies. So they don't have the same regulations. It's often also one of the challenges us as Olympic athletes and Paralympic athletes face often is because there's no Title IX or anything to govern international. And so there's no regulation internationally to say that we are afforded equal opportunities. And that's when it gets complicated too with transgender issues and stuff like that, is there's no regulation for anybody to be afforded those opportunities. So it's constantly up to the athletes and the people within those sports to fight for their rights and sometimes even take it to Court of Arbitration of Sport or for the international federation. So it gets very tricky at an elite level.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much for your time and for all of your
No, you can hear.
Yeah.
You can hear.
No, we're
Biggest-
all
biggest
just, I think
challenge.
so the question is, what do we see as the biggest threat or challenge to Title IX? I think one of the things that I'll say, it may not be the biggest threat, but one thing that I think is important to talk about and to flag, especially for the staffers in the room, is just some of the changes in the collegiate space, especially around name, image, and likeness, and some of the conversation around paying players as employees, all of those different dynamics. This past July, the NCAA changed their rules to allow student athletes to monetize their name, image, and likeness. But because there's no federal solution, we really see it state by state right now. And it has, essentially created a little bit of a free-for-all. And we're seeing real-world examples of how those deals are coming to be. There are some NIL deals that are very much exactly what I think was intended when people started talking about NIL, which is, a collegiate student athlete who has a very big presence on social media, has been paid by a company to elevate the brand and use that person's audience and influence. What is also happening now that we're starting to see is that there are either boosters or companies who have created NIL deals that are really just for certain positions on a team. So whether it's all of the walk-ons on a football team are getting essentially the equivalent to a scholarship, right? And they're calling it an NIL deal, but if you've heard what we've talked about, and we know that there are inequities around scholarships, if it's not addressed soon through either federal legislation addressing NIL or clarifications around how Title IX and NIL interact, you can see a world where somehow NIL gets used to circumvent the requirements of Title IX. So I think that that's one thing that's really important to flag and think about, because there are deals that are happening that are, whether it's equivalent of scholarships for all the walk-ons of a team or $50,000 a year for the full scholarship student athletes that play the offensive line on the football team, and deals like that are not happening simultaneous with women athletes. Some women athletes are getting good deals, but it's important that we keep an eye on this because, again, Title IX applies because it's an educational opportunity, right? Title IX prohibits sex-based discrimination in education. Sports are part of our educational system, and teaching lifelong lessons and education to our student athletes. So really, that's one thing to really think about from a Hill perspective, is how NIL and Title IX interact, and as bills are being introduced, that they're explicitly thinking about and talking about gender equity in Title IX, and that it's not either not mentioned at all or an afterthought. We need to think about it at the front end. And now we have real world examples of how these bills come to be. So really thinking critically, using the examples of how these deals are happening.
I think another possible area is just looking at overall at the high school and sometimes at the middle school level is how states are allocating funds to each of the schools, districts and schools. As more and more funds start to go to other resources and other locations, what does that mean for athletic opportunities? What does that mean for different gender-based opportunities? And how does that affect it? Does that mean if, and not saying we don't need to do things about school security and things like that, but we need to realize that if we're drawing X amount of dollars from school security, is that decimating our athletic programs, and what are the effects? And is that decimating our athletic programs equally? And that's just one example of how the overall budgets of what we're looking at school systems impact those sporting opportunities. And particularly in the South, where I'm from, we see it more, women's opportunities are the ones that are cut when school budgets have to be decreased or something like that.
And when they do that and they're not at equity or parity already, it's a violation of Title IX. Just saying. But
Just like a point of clarification. Yeah.
I mean, so I think the biggest threat is complacency, right? I think the fact that we have amazing female athletes and not enough women coaches for sure. think that's a really important point. But I think people think, oh, we've made it because 50 years and we have women in the Olympics and winning all these gold medals. And I mean, I think as we've heard, and we saw last year with Sedona Prince taking a simple video at the Women's Basketball Championships, right, that went viral. I mean, we have a long way to go. And I think we all need to just keep rededicating, I love that, ourselves to the fight and telling our friends and everybody we meet about it so that we can really achieve the equity that the law envisioned.
Any other questions? All right, well, thank you all so much for joining us today. Thank you to our panelists. Just a fantastic conversation. And please help yourself to lunch, and we have time to mix and mingle and have some more personal conversations. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Sarah. I was really gonna jump in and really go off on a tangent on that last question, and then I was like, you know what, just keep it to yourself. What was your tangent? I was basically just gonna be like we talked about people not knowing in the education piece and stuff like that.